Hi and welcome to this week's Wu Wei Wisdom Life Lessons teaching. It's great to be back with you all. This week we are exploring the power of acceptance, and you'll discover how this profound Taoist spiritual principle can enhance your life. Okay, David, so acceptance, it's a huge topic, but as a Taoist master as well as a therapist, what does acceptance mean to you in a spiritual or philosophical sense?
Well, you're right, it's a huge subject for us to talk about, and it may be a word that you're not too familiar with. You know the word, but you don't understand what it actually means. I think it's one of the biggest stumbling blocks I have with my clients when we go down the golden thread and we find some of the issues that need to be resolved with the inner child. I think the term acceptance is totally misunderstood by the part of your mind that we call the inner child, your subconscious mind or your ego. Because for the first thing, the inner child sees acceptance not as a powerful releasing thing for them, but as a way to accept what was done to them is okay. And that's not what acceptance means.
Yeah, I think that most people, if they're going to struggle with the concept of acceptance, it's that struggle comes from the belief that you either have to be a doormat and accept bad behavior from people or bad treatment, or that you are somehow saying what happened to me in my childhood, any sort of abuse or dysfunctionality. Our mind thinks, well, that means if I accept that it was all okay, like nothing ever happened. And I just can't do that, David.
I think you're right when you explain that, Alex. And for those of you new to our teachings, when we talk about the inner child, we're talking about a very deep part of your subconscious mind that's kind of frozen in childhood experiences and a childhood view of the world. And as Alex has just explained quite rightly, the child sees this thing, we call it the emotional pendulum. They see life and the situations that they encountered in their childhood as two extremes. Either you have to accept it and it's your fault, this was my fault that my parents were dysfunctional, or you swing the other way and you go, I'm not going to let it go, I'm going to hold on to that. And as I said at the beginning, these kind of issues are normally what I'm working with clients. They say things like, well, how do I let go? How do I let go of this? And this is where the understanding of the concept of acceptance can be very powerful.
What you're saying is through acceptance, we can let go or we can release stuff that from our past, right back into childhood that we've been holding on to, and which in effect has been harming us energetically in some way in terms of our beliefs, our thoughts, our health.
Yeah, so just before I go to explain it, so that what you've just said is very important. That harming that you've just experienced, you've just demonstrated by your hands, the harming of ourselves, really, and I know this is going to be hard for you to hear, but that harm is what you're inflicting on yourself. These are the emotions that you are creating. These are the blockages that you are creating within you. And this is the part of the inner child that just won't let go or doesn't know how to let go. This is something else that I hear. I don't know how to let go of it. And so let me explain what I mean by acceptance. Now we've got into the swing of things. So it's quite simple. We accept that it did happen. We accept that this is what happened. And actually, you are victorious. This is very important because you've already gone through it. You've already gone through that incident or incidences or time in your life or your childhood. You have gone through it. I don't like to use the word survive because I see it much more powerful than that. You are not a victim. I believe you are victorious. And if you don't accept what happened to you, and the inner child, and we'll get onto this, won't accept it because the inner child will be absolutely stuck on unfairness, injustice. Someone has to pay. Someone has to put it right. Now, the truth is, you can't do it. We haven't got a time machine. We can't go back and make that incident right. We can't change it around. We can't change people. We can't change events. It happened. It is part of your story. It's a chapter in your book. But the chapter doesn't have to be left open. You can close it. And so the power of acceptance is just accepting that this happened to you. And as I say to my clients, I don't know how you got through that. You are so awesome. You are so amazing to be able to get through that. And they find that really difficult to accept. And they go, oh, yeah, but, you know, the famous but. You know how much I dislike the word but. I can't accept that I got through it. I want somebody to pay. Somebody's got to realize. I'm sorry to talk so much, but it's such a big subject. And here's something else. He said, what? Just a client said to me yesterday, but if I accept it, don't they get away with it?
Mm-hmm. Well, don't they? Or, I mean, spiritually, logically, do they get away with it? Or, and I guess the follow-up question is, does it matter?
Well, I think you've answered your own question. So this is what I said. What's more important? Going back, for this lady was in her 70s, going back 60 years, and both of the people that are involved have both died. How would you put it right? And the only one that's suffering 60 years later is you. They have no idea. They have no concept. The only one that when we get down to this deep level, and this is why the golden thread, and again, for those of you new, we've done lots of teachings on the golden thread. It's a very powerful self-inquiry when you ask yourself, well, why do I create that feeling? Why do I think of it like that? When we did this with the client like yesterday, we went right back to when she was 10 and the unfairness of what she calls the injustice, the way her parents treated her. And she believes they treated her less than they treated her brother. They put the boy in front of her. Now, that could all be right. And I said to her, your perception, I'm not going to even question it. You're right. They did. They treated you worse. What are we going to do with that? What can we do with it? What can we change? And she said, well, it's not fair. They're parents. They shouldn't treat one child better than the other and give him presents and give me the lefts off. You're right. They shouldn't have done it. You're right. But what are you going to do with it? Because what you've been doing is holding on to that injustice for 60 years, creating very powerful red light feelings inside of herself, creating beliefs that she identified the 3 lies. I'm not good enough. This is what she said. Well, if they love me, if they loved him more than they love me, surely that means I'm not good enough. It doesn't mean that at all. It doesn't mean that at all. Surely it means I'm unlovable. No, it doesn't mean that. And so this is what you can get down by understanding acceptance and change those very fundamental core beliefs that we call the 3 lies.
And I think, David, that one of the blocks, or one of the additional blocks to people being able to fully embrace this idea of acceptance and releasing these past issues, incidences that they're stuck on, is, I don't know whether it's like a thing in Western society or I don't know what, or some, historic therapy thing. People get very hung up on the idea of, in order to release, I have to forgive. So I'd like to explore with you the difference between forgiveness and acceptance as a as a means of releasing these perceptions of injustice and unfairness, which may actually be real. So it may not be a faulty understanding of what happened.
No, you're right there on two levels. So forgiveness, to me, it doesn't really work, because what it does, it creates a hierarchical society that you're forgiving someone else, or you want their forgiveness, and this gets very complicated.
Sorry, can I just, so what do you mean, David? So that your position, if you position yourself as a person that needs to forgive someone else, that means you're placing yourself hierarchically above them, superior to them, in a position to be judgmental.
Judgmental, yes.
Not to make a judgment.
There's the difference. There's a vast difference between making a judgment about their actions and being judgmental about them. Again, I'm going to use my client from yesterday. She then went on, and when she developed the story and we got much deeper into it, we found out several things that could see that particularly her mother was trying her best with her father, who had some alcohol problems and some other problems and difficulties. But when we started to develop her story and do the inner child work and to speak to her inner child, we started to understand that on reflection, she could see her mother was also really struggling. Her father had some alcohol problems and some violent problems, and she could change her view from falling into this being judgmental, thinking about this is the problem with forgiveness, wanting to forgive them, instead of accepting what happened. Accepting what happened to me is far more powerful, because we can just accept it. That happened. It happened. We can't change it. This is the situation that you went through successfully, difficult for you, but that shows me just how immense and awesome you are to be able to come through that. I listened to many stories from my clients about their tremendously challenging and difficult childhoods. And I've got to be honest, in all my years, I'm frankly amazed on how they did it. There's something inside of us that is so powerful that I would call Shen, your spirituality, that really, if you do not accept the situation, rather than getting stuck into judging and being judgmental about the person, what they should have done and what they could have done and their problems, instead of just accepting that this is a chapter, as I say, and we can close the chapter. And this is why I think acceptance is far more powerful than forgiveness.
And also on that judgmental point, with forgiveness, there is this idea of you need to forgive the whole person, that you're making a judgmental statement about the whole person. You know, my mother was a really bad person. And as you say, actually the reality, when you reflect on what happened, yes, your mother may have been emotionally imbalanced and there may have been reasons for this, or your mother may have misbehaved and there were reasons for this. But that's a far better way to make a judgment, rather than being very judgmental about the mother as the whole person, like, oh, she's just a bad person,
yes,
or he's just a bad person.
And then they use those very powerful words like a narcissist or an evil person. Mm-hmm. And then what that's doing, when you class the person in those words, it kind of builds a wall around that situation. And then that situation is really almost impossible to resolve for the inner child, because A, things have moved on, they are no longer around, or they may have changed, or something has happened. But for the part of your mind that we're calling the inner child, that is kind of frozen in time. As I say in many teachings, the Chinese call this like the kernel in the middle of the nut that's frozen in time. And one of the great teachings of Taoism, instead of building a wall to freeze and to lock yourself into the past, use those bricks that you build the wall with to build a bridge that leads you out of it, a bridge that you can move through that episode, through that incident in your life. And this, to me, makes it far more powerful, because then you can just accept your view is correct. How you perceive it is correct. You don't have to go into the story. You don't have to spend hours and sessions going through it. Everything you're saying, I say to my clients, I believe you 100%. Not even questioning it. I'm not even going to challenge you. I'm going to believe your view of the situation, because that's the inner child talking. Now, what are we going to do about that? We can't change it. We haven't got a time machine, as I said before. What are you going to do with that allows you to walk over the bridge? Because this is a spiritual bridge, as you mentioned earlier. This is really a spiritual teaching. How can you move away from that prison that you've created and unable to resolve? But you take control to build the bridge, to move away from it and start to come into your balance, into your harmony, into who you really are as a human and a spiritual being.
And so, David, I can see how the principle of acceptance can be very, very powerful when we're seeking to unlock and resolve and release historic issues from, say, our childhood or younger years. What about how we can apply the principle of acceptance to our current life, our current circumstances? Because, again, playing devil's advocate, a lot of people would say, I don't like the concept of acceptance because it sounds like settling for less than what I should have. It sounds like being a doormat. It sounds like not having any boundaries. It sounds like believing everything is a fait accompli and that I have no part to play.
It's funny you listed those, Alex. It's very interesting because I almost disagree with everything you say, and I see the opposite.
Yeah.
Acceptance in your current state is not being a doormat, is then accepting the situation and then reflecting on now, what can you do? How can you move on? Because you may have to accept that the person, the situation, the company you work for in any term doesn't meet your expectations, doesn't live up to your morals, to your standards. Now, you can spend the rest of your time trying to change other people, trying to get them to meet your expectations, trying to put all your energy into changing a partner, a friendship, a business, instead of saying, you know what? After these months, and this is what this lady says, she said, I always had that gut feeling. I always had that gut feeling that I could just walk away from this. I can just leave it. I doesn't have to bother my life. And that's the power of acceptance. So rather than being a doormat, I think this is really being positive. And then you say not putting boundaries. I think acceptance puts boundaries because you accept what the person's doing. Now you can make a judgment whether is that suitable for you or not suitable for you. And so you can allow them to move on with their life, how they want to live, and that frees you to walk across the bridge. That frees you to walk on your path. And I forgot the second one you said.
There is also the idea of acceptance, meaning life is a fait accompli and that we've got no part to play.
And I think it's the opposite. I think that when you accept the situation, what you do then is you become accountable. You become responsible for your life, for how you're going to deal with that situation or that person. Rather than trying to change them to suit you, you accept what they're doing and how they are. Now you have to choose how you're going to respond. And that to me is an extremely powerful and freeing. And I'm going to use the analogy of the bridge. Means you have to walk us over the bridge. You can't keep on blaming other people. Well, if it wasn't for him, if it wasn't for that, if it wasn't for this, if they just change, if I just work a little bit hard and get them to change, then I'm going to be okay. So for me, this becomes extremely powerful.
I kind of get the feeling, David, when you're talking about this, it's almost like if we accept that life, people, circumstances will not come at us the way we expect, right, predict, or necessarily want, that so we if we really embed that understanding of how the universe works, because the universe is a place of ongoing transformation and unpredictability,
yes,
that it's like by having that acceptance of that principle, we are conserving our precious energy and creativity and responsiveness to then be the most light-footed and resourceful and creative in terms of how we respond. It's like we become really in our Wu Wei flow.
That's right, Alex. You brought up two important points there. The first point is, when we don't accept, this is the part of your mind that we're calling the inner child. And again, if you're unsure what we're talking about, we've done numerous teachings on what the inner child is and how you speak to the inner child and how you work with the inner child. But one of the things about the inner child is it will not accept the unpredictability and the unknown of the universe that we live in. The inner child, I always picture it in this term, kind of crosses their arms and say, no, I want it the way I want it, when I want it, how I want it. It should be my way. These are the expectations. My parents should be the way I think parents should be. They should be like other parents. My partner, my friendships, my things should be the way I want it to be. And it's not the way that I want it to be. And then, if you've ever used this word, this is a famous word of the inner child. Well, two words, really. It's not fair.
3 words.
And it's not just. 3 words. Sorry. It's not fair. It's not just. It's not. Yeah. But when you hear, and even your physical child, when you hear your physical child saying, Mom, Dad, it's not fair, what they're actually saying, it's not the way I want it to be. And as you quite rightly said, this is one of the most spiritual, challenging Taoist teachings that you already know. The world, the universe, your life, people you're going to meet, the people in your family, the people you're going to meet, your career, won't be the way that you want it to be. We live in the unknown. And that brings you on to the Taoist teaching. And one of the best ways that I can describe this, and I like to describe it, is in the old days when we used to have sailing ships. And sailing ships would be on the oceans. And they would have to learn how to navigate by the stars. They would have to understand currents, tides, winds, and they would have to adapt their sails and the way they sail their boat through these transitions, through these constant moving of all the time. They couldn't just put all the sails up in the middle of a storm and say, no, well, I'm not going to take those sails down. I don't care how much it storms. They have to be adaptable and they have to be flexible. And that really is what Wu Wei means, being in your flow. Effortless effort. You take the effort to put the sails down or put the sails up so you can get the best response from the conditions, from the wind, from the tides, from the stars, from the moon. And you're working with nature. And this is the natural way. I'm sorry, the natural way is not a straight line. Your life will never be the straight line. Look back in your past. It was never a straight line. And this comes on to one of the lies. If you've ever said, I can't cope, stop it. You are a coping machine. You've always coped. Look back on your life. Everything that's come your way, you have coped. What we're talking about here is how do you cope better? How do you cope more skillful? How do you know when to put the sails up, put the sails down? How do you know when to go with the tide or against the tide? And this is your skills. The Taoism is about this effortless effort and being in your flow.
I mean, David, that idea of the sailing ship analogy is really good, because acceptance is absolutely not about, accepting there's a storm coming or a huge wave coming and then not doing anything about it, being a doormat. It's about being responsive, but accepting the things that you can control, and accepting what you can't control and accepting what you can control. And it really, really strikes me as, if we accept that, as you say, life is not a straight line, it doesn't go in a upwards trajectory in a straight line pattern. That is not life. But if we can accept that principle, to me, it's like there is way less struggle in our life and way more ease.
Well, you can kind of prove that right now. And if you're listening to this teaching and you can see yourself in what we're saying, this is why your emotions are so powerful. And this is why we always teach, you are the creator of your emotions. You are not the victim of them. So let me prove that to you. So if you're watching this and this is relevant to you, think about a time that we're talking about, maybe in your childhood or maybe currently, that you are just that rigid. You just see the unfairness, how it's wrong. It shouldn't be like that. They shouldn't act this way. Or back in your childhood, it should have been a different way. And just feel that tension in your chest. Now take a breath and just imagine to yourself that if you just accepted that that's the way it was, just as Alex has said, the storm is coming. We can see the storm on the horizon. We know we're going to have a storm. Now, how are we going to deal with that? Can you accept the storm and then deal with it in a skillful way that reflects who you are spiritually? Can you breathe deeper? Can you bring that flexibility into your thinking, into your life? Could you change and widen your perception about that person? Could you see that maybe they're going through difficult times? Maybe they're confused. Maybe they're stuck with their inner child. And widen your perception. And now notice how your feelings change. And that's a kind of easy example that you can try that on your own thing. Just think about it from the viewpoint of your inner child, and then begin to think about it from a much wider view, that you are free. You should be free. You have choices, and be flexible to make those choices, and never doubt yourself. You will make mistakes. And this is why we call these teachings life lessons. We are meant to make mistakes because that's how we learn. That's how you learn. And so perhaps you made a mistake, or perhaps they're making a mistake. And that's how we learn as human beings. Now, can you take down that solid wall where everything's stuck and solid, and take those bricks and start building that bridge that leads you out of this place of just going round and around on the carousel of despair, lying to yourself, saying you're not good enough, you can't cope, you're unlovable, and take a breath and just walk over the bridge into freedom, spiritual freedom. And that's what Wu Wei is. That's the flow. That's your flow of life. That's the life you should be living. And I want you to live that life.
Wonderful. Thank you, David. And I will put a link in the show notes to more teachings that we've done on the Taoist concept of Wu Wei, as well as other long form teachings we've done on the power of letting go of the past. So I'm really sure they will both help you. I do hope you have enjoyed this teaching. Please let us know, and perhaps share it with someone else who you think it may also benefit. David works every week with clients all over the world on exactly these sorts of issues by Zoom video call. If you'd like to learn more about David's consultations, do check out the link in the show notes as well. And finally, please don't forget to subscribe to our YouTube channel. We produce new long-form teachings every Saturday, as well as 2 midweek short snippets of wisdom for you. So don't forget to subscribe. We look forward to sharing with you again very soon. Bye-bye.